What's up, kinfolk? Welcome to the #1 college football show. I am your host, RJ Young. Thank you for watching on the Fox Sports app, YouTube, or listening wherever you get your podcast. Today, we're going to go through our Week 10 mailbag where we take on, your answers to my questions, starting with, who's going to be the next head coach at Auburn? And I got what I think is in there, not an unoriginal take here, but one that you're probably going to be very interested in hearing the answer to. We're also going to talk about whether or not Tennessee or Georgia is going to get exposed, among other things. And as always, I am joined on this show by producer Tyler Wojak, our lead producer here on the #1 college football show, who has done yeoman's work of going through my Twitter mentions to find out which one of you has the best answer to any of these questions, or even a question worth, discussing on the show here right now. Hey, Tyler, what we got, dude?
So first one, this, you already mentioned it, Tennessee, Georgia, biggest game of the weekend. And you asked, do you think Tennessee will expose Georgia or Georgia will expose Tennessee? There's a ton of interesting answers here, but the first one I'm going to go with, this one comes from Drew, who says, ain't no way Kirby's D is getting gassed downfield. Hendon Hooker will have to use his legs way more on Saturday. You think that's going to be the case?
Yeah, I do. I think he's going to have to run away from, some really great pass rushing. Now, that's also interesting in that Nolan Smith, who is the captain on that defense and the leader on that defense, is having surgery to repair a pectoral muscle. So they'll have to come up with yet another 5-star to play at that outside linebacker defensive end position. But quite frankly, this is the best defense that Tennessee is going to face all season. And it has been the game that I've circled on the calendar since Tennessee got past Alabama. Very, very interested to see how Hendon Hooker handles this defense, because it's going to be indicative of not just whether or not they can win the game, but whether or not Tennessee can win a national championship.
Yeah, I agree. And we saw what Georgia can do against a top-scoring offense in that season opener against Oregon. I think Oregon has the 5th highest scoring offense right now in the country, and Georgia made them look like a high school team. Now, granted, that was 2 months ago. It's a different Oregon team now, but it's something to keep in mind this weekend with Tennessee coming to town. So let's get to our next one. This one comes from Joseph D., who says, I think Georgia will win, but not sure about exposing Tennessee. I just like Georgia at home. I think that's a fair point.
It is a fair point, and I phrased it as exposed just because I thought that it was much more a conversation about which one of these teams is good versus bad, as opposed to what the score is going to be. I believe the line started out at 8.5 or 9 points, which still for me is large, especially when you make Georgia the favorite there, as opposed to a Tennessee team that is perhaps the most popular team in all of college football right now. I don't think that expose in that context, in the way that Joseph is using it, is actually exposure. I think that, if anything, you put on your SF, what is it white folks wear? SPF 40? Tyler, is that what y'all put on? Because I don't wear sunglasses.
I'm more of an SPF like 15 to 30, but yeah, some people do use 40.
All to say, I like Georgia at home here too, but I'm also in the minority on this. I'm interested. Tyler, do you think that Georgia can beat Tennessee at home?
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely can win. You and I have been to Athens. We were actually at the same game in 2019 when Georgia was hosting Notre Dame, and we saw just how crazy of an environment that could be. And I saw Kirby Smart tweet out a message to the fans basically saying, if you have a voice when you leave that game, you weren't loud enough. So I think it's going to be loud. There's rumors that there's going to be a lot of Tennessee fans. I think I saw something that a Tennessee donor purchased a bunch of tickets and is giving them to Tennessee fans. So I think Georgia could definitely win. But I think I'm going to pick Tennessee. We'll get more into that later. Let's go to our third response here, who's also picking Tennessee to win. This one comes from Don Ken, who says, not only will Tennessee win, Tennessee will expose Georgia. This is the first complete team that UGA has seen all year. Georgia has actually had some close contests against teams they should have easily blown out. Sometimes the Georgia offense doesn't show until the second half. Cannot be like that against Tennessee. Strong words coming from Don.
Well, I honestly disagree with they can't be like that against Tennessee. I think Georgia can do whatever Georgia wants to do, because as much as we want to talk nicely about the Tennessee Volunteers, who have 5 AP ranked wins and could very well be one of the best teams in college football, I also just want to underscore here that Georgia is giving up 10.5 points per game, and Georgia's scoring 41 points a game. And I'm the first person to point out that giving up 22 to Kent State and going down 10 to Missouri is not a good look. I'll also just throw in here, this whole SEC adage about the games that matter to those programs and the games that don't. So Trevor Knight beats Nick Saban in Alabama with Josh Heupel as offensive coordinator in 2013. And all I could hear from Bama fans is that we didn't care about that game because it's not for the national championship, which sounded like sour grapes, right? And then you get to 2018, where I feel as if Oklahoma has a mental edge over Alabama, having beaten them 5 years before. And Bama fans are very quick to say, no, this one is for the play-in to the national championship game. You're not going to be within the ballpark of Alabama. And guess what? Quinnen Williams chased Kyler Murray into dirty and bloody. Like, Murray went for 300 and 100, but it was the hardest fought 300 and 100 I've ever seen a quarterback take. And it felt like that defensive line just had their way with the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, which is another way of saying that I believe that Georgia is going to rise to this challenge. I don't see Georgia getting exposed here, man. I mean, they're wearing red. That's about as much sun exposure as I think they're about to get, especially as, Tyler, talk about the 2019 game, Notre Dame. That game was at night, and it was like the first time in, like, I want to say 6 years or maybe ever that the window for the night game had been used in the SEC for Georgia in some time. And this feels like a game that has that sort of significance. Add to that, just one more fact. The last time that we had number 1 versus number 2 in the AP play against each other in the SEC, the winner of that game won the national championship. And it happened again in 2011. So this game very much could produce the national champion this season. What do you think about that?
Oh, it definitely could. I honestly think that it's going to be a really close game. I do think Tennessee is going to pull it out, and I think we're going to walk away from this one going, yep, those are two of the best 4 teams in the country. Offensively, defensively, I think both teams are loaded, and it's going to be an awesome, awesome football game. I cannot wait to see the atmosphere. When we were there, they did the light show. Do you remember that? That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen at a college football stadium, and I think it's going to be similar this weekend. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Tennessee's defense, and I understand, but I think it's a little overblown. Right now, Tennessee is the 26th ranked scoring defense in college football. Now, we saw Alabama just basically have their way, but that's Alabama. It's Bryce Young. It's Jahmyr Gibbs. So I don't hold that against them as much. Now, if we're looking at the stats, Georgia does appear to be more balanced, but we'll see. Stetson Bennett hasn't really been in a shootout since ever, maybe. So we'll see this weekend.
Alabama, Georgia SEC championship game, and they lost that game.
Yeah, they did. And then in the national championship, I wouldn't consider that a shootout. And Georgia's defense, they rose to the occasion there after getting, I don't want to say embarrassed in that SEC championship, but it's certainly a wake-up call. And I think this game is going to be awesome. But I do like the Vols.
Yeah, man, I'm just not going to bet against Kirby Smart in that defense. The thing that I've come to learn about college football, especially having been an Oklahoma Sooner fan, from my life, is that offense doesn't win you championships. Offense doesn't beat better teams. Defense does. And to the point about maybe we're overblowing Tennessee's defensive woes, I do this math every year. If you don't have a top 20 defense, it's really hard to win a national championship. If you don't have a top 10 defense and your offense stutters, it's really hard to beat really good teams. And I think that Georgia just has more margin for error, whereas I believe Tennessee's going to have to score on every possession that they have. And I'm even talking about 1 or 2 3-and-outs is enough to give Stetson Bennett, Kenny McIntosh, Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington enough of an edge to let your defense actually pin back their ears and go after Hendon Hooker. Either way, I'm with you. I'm excited about this game because I really do want to see who's good and what that means going forward for what we're going to know about the college football playoff.
Without a doubt. Now, those are 2 teams pretty close to the mountaintop. Now, let's shift gears here to a team that is not anywhere close, at least not at the moment. So you asked the question, who should be the next head coach at Auburn? This is obviously following Brian Harson's firing this week. And there were a ton of interesting responses. But the one that I got most frequently, or the one that I saw most frequently, rather, was Deion Sanders. So let's go to our first response here. This one comes from Hunter Wells Kimball, whose tag is at NFL Future GM. So we got a future GM on the show here who says, I'm personally hoping Coach Primetime gets the call. I think he's one of the only coaches in the nation that can make Auburn great again. Plus, how awesome would it be to see a game with Coach Prime versus Coach Saban? That second point, I got to give him that.
I get to see it in an Aflac commercial. That's what I get out of that. But also, no shade to you, Hunter, but you're a future NFL GM and not an athletic director, because what you're asking is to get the Deion Sanders, the Coach Prime experience at Auburn. And I don't think that Auburn is the kind of place that wants to get down with the way that Coach Prime wants to do the job. I say this because they got something close. I shouldn't say close to it. The closest thing that Auburn has had to Coach Prime is Gus Malzahn. And Gus Malzahn is out there doing fun stuff. He's running fun plays. He's having a good time. And they ran him up out of there, and they're still paying him to coach at Central Florida, who, by the way, could end up winning their own conference championship this year. I get why Auburn fans would say, go back up the truck to Jackson State and see what you can do here. But I'm also looking at this and going, there are lots of men who I think could do great things at Auburn. But Tyler, I'm going to throw it back to you. Do you think that Deion Sanders and Auburn are a fit?
Personally, no. We talked a lot about Deion last week and what his future might look like. And you said that he should probably stay at Jackson State until a job like Alabama or something that comes up for him. And I agree. Auburn is such a unique place. I'm not saying it's a bad job, but it's certainly a unique job, and one that finding the right fit for is going to be tough. And I think there's a lot of really good coaches out there who are going to get asked about this job, and they have to really think about, is this right for me? Which I think is a good segue into our next response here, who comes from Wilbur Sample, who says, should be or will is the question. If they could get out of their own way, Lane Kiffin would be their perfect hire, but they can't and won't, so they'll end up with Hugh Freeze, I assume they're referring to there, and the same booster problem that has killed them for the last decade. How do you feel about Lane Kiffin potentially going to Auburn?
I think it'd be fascinating. I think it'd be very interesting. Matter of fact, the last time that we saw a sitting head coach leave a job, not just within the conference, but for a rival in the same division, is actually Ole Miss to Auburn. That's Tommy Tuberville leaving Ole Miss in 1999 to go to Auburn. And 5 years later, he and Cadillac Williams run the table. 2004, Auburn goes 13-0, finishes as the AP number 2 team in the country. And I believe that was the moment when everybody decided, okay, we need a playoff because this can't happen anymore. We can't have an undefeated Auburn team in the SEC not have an opportunity to play for a national championship. That said, the Lane Kiffin experience and the Auburn experience feels like fun for everybody. A fun time will be had by all because we're talking about perhaps the most college football programs with the most college football coach of college football coaches coming together to form up like Voltron for an unforgettable experience. Like, I'm on board for that. This is a program that once slicked the rails of a railroad to try to knock off the track a rival team. You know, the way that Auburn fans want to get down and the way that Auburn fans feel about themselves is wild. Like, the only team that I think even comes to a high watermark of the Auburn fan experience is probably A&M, who you can't tell anything about nothing, right? Now imagine that they get Lane Kiffin to come to Auburn. Monique voice, I would like to see it, Tyler. I would like to see it.
I don't blame you. I'd love to see it. I think either of these examples, either Deion Sanders or Lane Kiffin, it would be great theater for all of us fans watching it. I can't even imagine that the stakes of the Iron Bowl with either of these coaches roaming the Auburn sideline. But again, it's a question of fit because I have no doubt that Auburn could offer Lane Kiffin more money than what he's making at Ole Miss. And they probably, if we're being honest, have more resources to win a national championship. I mean, they won one in the past 10 years, I believe, and they made it to another one. So clearly it's possible. Now it's a question as to Lane Kiffin, do you want to leave? I mean, he has a pretty good situation at Ole Miss right now. But again, if he really wants to win a national championship, if that is his number one goal, Auburn is probably the better fit there. But it's a risk. It's a risk for any of these coaches, and I think it goes back to your original point. Does Auburn want to go with Deion Sanders? That's how I feel about Lane Kiffin as well. It's more up to the coaches than it is to Auburn, whether Auburn fans want to admit it or not.
I think that you're onto something when you say it's up to Auburn fans. However, I do think that Ole Miss to Auburn is a lateral move. I know that Auburn won a 2010 national championship. They also had Cam Newton, which for me makes Cam Newton the greatest college football player of all time. Cam Newton carried Auburn to a national championship, not the other way around. Also, underneath all of that, we're talking about having to play not just Nick Saban every week or every year, but being in his state. It's his state. And Auburn fans know that better than anybody else knows that. okay? At least in Mississippi, you can go beat up on Mike Leach in the Egg Bowl. It's okay. It's fine. You're going to win some of those. You're going to lose some of those. You're still going to have to play LSU, Texas A&M, Arkansas, all teams that are very good and could be SEC title contenders any given year because the division is just that deep. I also want to give a nod to producer Kat, who I'm just going to go ahead and continue to mention is a Tennessee alumna, who makes the point that, we're talking about a program that's giving away $55,000 a day in buyouts presently to Brian Harsin, to Gus Malzahn. It's ridiculous what they're able to do over there. So you talk about having resources. I mean, sure, if those resources aren't tied up and being given to dudes that don't coach at Auburn, yeah, you've got the resources. But if you're going to pay, my goodness, $55,000 a day to two dudes to not coach your football team and to coach other football teams, I don't see how you can tell another coach you're setting him up to succeed with that kind of math being doled out to the last two dudes that took on the head coaching job at Auburn.
Hey, the best job in the world is a fired football coach. That's all I got to say. I move on to the next two responses. We'll go pretty quick with these because I thought they were interesting, but they're a little bit off the beaten path. First one comes from Jacob Bauer, who says, Brian Hartline. This one, I did a double take when I saw it, but we've talked about Brian Hartline at length on the show, and I know you think really highly of him as a coach.
I do. I think the world of Brian Hartline as a coach. I mean, you look at what he's been able to do at Ohio State as the wide receiver coach, and I dare say it is unprecedented. And the reason I put it that way is there's really no wide receiver tradition outside of Paul Warfield, Chris Carter, David Boston, and then you get into the Terry McLaurins, the Santonio Holmeses of the world. But we took it back to 2007, the last time that Ohio State had a first-round draft pick in the NFL draft, until Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave did it just last year. And when you think about what Ohio State has been in college football as a whole, it's been running the football. They want to run the football. They want to play defense. They have Heisman winners that play tailback. Like the only guy to win it twice played tailback at Ohio State. So for you get a guy like Brian Hartline who immediately hits the ground running and recruits his behind off 5-star after 5-star and then develops them into first-round draft picks, I mean, you could do a whole hell of a lot worse than asking Brian Hartline to be your next head coach. However, I think the Auburn job is beneath him. I honestly believe being the Ohio State wide receiver coach right now, with the guys he has right now, the head coach he has, the play calling they have, the kind of play they have on both sides of the ball, you want to leave all that to go and rebuild a place that is going to bounce you just as soon as it doesn't look like it's going well? Like, I can't do that to Brian Hartline. Gus Malzahn beaten Nick Saban and they fired him for it. Like, I don't see that as a great way to say, hey, Brian Hartline, please take your first pass at being a Power 5 head coach in Nick Saban's state at the program that is under Nick Saban's thumb. It's just not a great way to do business. Now, again, not shade to Brian Hartline as much as it is to Auburn. Does that make sense, Tyler?
Yeah, you caught me a little off guard there, but I agree with you. I mean, that would be Brian Hartline's first head coaching job. He's not even an offensive coordinator right now. That'd be like someone throwing you off a ship into the middle of the ocean and say, learn how to swim. That'd basically be trying to learn on the job at Auburn.
To that point, though, Shane Beamer had never been an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator for that matter. It's not unprecedented. Dabo Swinney was never a coordinator. I'm not going to throw that part out and say that disqualifies anybody from being a head coach. I'm just going to say that Auburn is not exactly the place where I would want to get started.
Right. The stakes are a little bit different there. But let's get to our last response here. This one comes from Land of Troy, who says Matt Rule. Now, Matt Rule, his name has come up a lot ever since he got fired from the Panthers. But I hear you laughing. I don't really think this is the right fit for Matt Rule.
I'm laughing about people wanting a man who's making $40+ million for the next 2 years to sit on his couch to coach their crappy football team. Like, I just don't understand. I mean, you just said it like 5 minutes ago. The best job in America is an unemployed and just fired head coach in college football. And apparently in the NFL, because David Tepper is going to pay out all of this money, something like $834,000 a month for Matt Rule to sit on his couch in North Carolina. I don't think that I want to go back to working that quickly, right? I want to wait for that money to stop coming in before I even think about wanting to get another job. And even then, $40 million? You want me to give up that to coach Auburn in this economy? There's no way, Tyler. Like, I don't get it. I would not. I'd say, hey, Matt, courtesy call, because I got to go back to my boosters and tell him something. You interested? And he's like, please, appreciate the call. No. Click. That's the end of it. I don't understand. Tyler, do you have an argument for why Matt Rule should be the head coach at Auburn?
Certainly not an argument, unless Matt was just like, you know what? He sees it as an investment opportunity. Maybe he could double his money. He's like, oh, I'll take that job. I'll mail it in, completely sabotage the situation. And then instead of getting $40 million, I'll get 80 because they'll fire me within a year anyway. And then I'll just keep racking up the money.
Goodness gracious, man. I guess. I guess that's one way of looking at it, but I'm not that money hungry.
That's not a real opinion, by the way.
Right. I'm just trying to make it work inside of my brain. Right? Maybe it's like crypto in that way. If you can talk yourself into it, you can talk yourself into anything. You know, and I'm over here going, well, Matt Rule, I wonder if he wants another Temple. Think about that for just a second. Who wants another Temple? Temple doesn't even want another Temple. You know what I mean? And that's the reason we know this man. And then he goes into another dumpster fire that was Baylor football and made it respectable. I got to believe those are the hardest jobs in the world to get respect from. And then you get your Yankees job because that man did want to get back to the NFL and be a head coach in the NFL, and they fire you for it. I got better things to do, like cut my lawn, like water the grass, like find out if my grandkids are cool. You know, like, y'all want to build race cars? Again, maybe I'm just projecting here. All right, Tyler, is that all we have for today's mailbag?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Otherwise, it's just going to be me rambling about how do I make Matt Rule make sense. But rather than waste anybody's time with that nonsense, that is going to do it for this episode of the #1 college football show. My thanks as always to our lead producer, Tyler Wojak. Our senior producer is Catherine Donnelly. Our director is Chris Cheshire. Our social media maven is Javion Duncan. Our lead of screening is Rachel Cohn. I'm the host, RJ. We will see y'all after Georgia, Tennessee on Saturday night. Deuces.